Today's episode of Morning Coffee with Cameron is brought to you in part by Hook Theory. Hook Theory is one of my favorite online resources for music theory and composition, with many of my favorite tools being totally free to access. They've also got some of my favorite affordable books that teach you music theory, songwriting, composition, melody tips, and more in an interactive and easy to digest format. If you want to check out Hook Theory for yourself, which I highly recommend you do, you can use my affiliate link down in the description to get not only some cool new stuff for yourself, but help support the channel in the process so I can make more videos like this one. Have you ever had one of those studio sessions where hours seem to go by in minutes? Where creating the perfect drum groove seems to take no effort whatsoever, and nailing down the bass line feels almost instinctual. Every melody seems to be pulled from the ether, perfectly formed, as though it's a piece of a musical puzzle that was designed just for you. The music is literally pouring out of you. You're covered in sweaty, hot, sticky beats, and you find yourself in this altered state of awareness where the process of creating becomes effortless. And before you know it, you've created your next track, and it's a banger. You wrap things up, and then sometime later, you head back into the studio for another session. You fire up the DAW, and so it would seem you finally lost your golden touch. But what's the problem here? It's not like you can't make music. I mean, you've been doing this for ages now. It's not that you have a shortage of ideas, it's just that they aren't quite hitting yet. But maybe it's a lack of inspiration or motivation. No big deal, fair enough. So you'll just come back to it later. Next thing you know, you find yourself in this loop of coming back later over and over and over. And now it's been weeks or months or even longer since you've actually sat down and started working on a track. Howdy doody buckaroonies, and welcome back to another episode of the Mustache Couch Show, where we all sit down, take off our pants, snuggle in, and talk about our feelings. In any creative industry, there's this weird idea that whenever you want to make something, there has to be this inspiration or this intrinsic sense of motivation. There's this idea that the art doesn't create itself, and you don't create the art, but the art is spoken through you through some kind of divine intervention. So why is it then that this divine creative voice is ghosting you all of a sudden? This idea of a necessary degree of inspiration or motivation is a trap that I think we all fall in from time to time, and I think this leads to one of those really important questions that any creator needs to ask themselves. Are you excited at the idea of making something, or are you excited to actually put the work in to make it? After working in the music industry professionally for a while now, I think one of the weird things I've learned is that motivation is really sort of a myth. The constant of creating isn't motivation itself. It's a dedication to consistently being able to put in the work. There certainly are days where I naturally feel a bit more inspired than others, but there are also days where I'm just not feeling it, but I'm still able to show up and get something done. The paradox then becomes, in a creative industry, how do you put in the work if you're just not feeling it? Because after all, you can't force creativity. Or can you? This idea and the pursuit of effortless work has been studied over and over, and it always comes back to one thing: the flow state. The flow state is exactly what you experience in those sessions where you're turning out tracks in this magical, almost meditative state. Now, this is all well and good, but if we lack motivation, how do we get into the flow state? Well, the truth is, we're not totally sure yet. There's been quite a bit of research done on the flow state and what causes it. However, there's always a lack of certainty with these things. There are different triggers that are thought to help you enter that flow state, but of course results aren't guaranteed. All you can really do is try and see what happens. Some of the most well-known triggers of the flow state are risk, novelty, complexity, unpredictability, and pattern recognition. Some of these are a bit easier than others to implement when it comes to making music. Novelty might mean setting some kind of bizarre challenge for yourself or trying to write with an instrument you don't know how to play. It could even be something as simple as writing in a different room than you normally write in. Unpredictability might be using something like dice to come up with a chord progression or use generative tools to create the melody. In Stephen Kotler's book, The Rise of Superhuman, he talks about the idea of a skill to challenge ratio, which I think personally is one of the best ways to trigger this flow state. In his research, he found that the optimal balance of challenge and skill is about 104%. In other words, a task should be 4% more more difficult than your maximum capacity in order for the task to take you into a flow state. I think this makes a lot of sense when you really think about it. You're never going to get out of your comfort zone and feel like you accomplished something if you're doing the same thing over and over. If you went into your studio and wrote the same song every single day over and over and over, that would get pretty boring pretty quickly. By pushing yourself ever so slightly out of your comfort zone by exploring something new or pushing yourself to improve in some aspect, you'll feel more accomplished at the end of the session if you succeed. Now the question becomes, how do you get started when you don't feel like you have the energy to push the ball to get the ball rolling? One thing I tell myself all the time is action inspires action. In any creative field, there's sort of this cyclical process that takes place of motivation inspiring action and action in turn making you more motivated. And I think the better you get at developing the action side of that wheel, the more reliable the wheel becomes rather than relying solely on motivation. In his book, The War of Art, Steven Pressfield says that the hardest part of writing isn't writing itself, it's sitting down to write. One of the techniques that's worked for me time and time again is the 5-minute rule. You force yourself to sit down and just start working for 5 minutes. More often than not, that 5 minutes quickly turns to 15, and 15 minutes turns to an hour, and next thing you know, a whole session's gone by and you've actually gotten something done without feeling like you were really sitting there working to begin with. There's also something to be said for maintaining some kind of schedule. Recently, I found myself pretty off track between client projects, YouTube projects, and my personal life getting a bit hectic with lots of weekend trips and family visiting and stuff like that. This put me in a pretty bad funk where I felt like I couldn't get anything done and I was always behind. Of course, I immediately defaulted to blaming myself and feeling like I had just lost my spark and I was finally hitting that dreaded burnout phase. But the real truth was I had just interrupted my own flow. Having a set schedule can help keep you on track and also create a sense of urgency to just get things done. This also has the added benefit of helping you avoid perfectionism. If Monday and Tuesday are for writing and Wednesday and Thursday are for mixing and mastering, then you've really only got a couple of days to actually get the song done. It's also important to recognize when you do your best work and to cut distractions during that time. Maybe you're more of a morning person. Maybe it's during that break in the middle of the day, or maybe you're just more of a night owl. Whatever your creative time zone is, make sure that during that time you take some active steps to protect your ability to try and access that flow state. Turn off your email, silence your phone, and make it so that you're able to focus on the task at hand. I think it's also a great idea to set clearly defined goals for your sessions to keep you on track and give you something to work towards. Whether it's finishing a track, working on the guitars, working on mastering your EP, or fixing that f***ing snare drum that keeps ruining the mix, having a checklist or at least a loose set of goals can kickstart the creative process. One of the biggest struggles for creatives, and probably the thing that kills motivation the most, is this need to constantly be one-upping yourself. Every song needs to be better than the last, every album needs to be miles ahead of your last release, your visuals need to be better, your next post needs to get more likes, and so on. Of course, we all like success, but using this as your metric to define success is a dangerous dragon to chase because it will ultimately kill your motivation, and it's not really a healthy goal to go after anyway. Over a long enough time span, inevitably your skills will progress. Your music gets better, your photos get more likes, your following grows, your mixes sound cleaner, and you'll ultimately develop a clearer vision of the ideal form of your work. I think this is often why later releases by bands and musicians tend to sound different than their earlier works. It's not necessarily that they got better, it's that they got better at creating a clearer version of what they had in mind to begin with. This sense that you need to improve by a massive margin with every single session is a dangerous mindset to have. Instead, I think the better way to look at a session is to simply take a moment to debrief and find what you took away from it. Whether it's good or bad, as long as you take something away from it, you've improved. Creative motivation certainly has its seasons, but unlike a regular calendar, it's not really as regular or as predictable as we might like. So if you're waiting around for motivation to strike, unfortunately, you never know when that's going to be. So sometimes it's just about learning to jump before you look. With that, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and as always, I hope this inspires you to get out there and make something awesome.